Located just east of Vault 13 in New California, Vault 15 is another location we get to explore and find out about in the first 2 games. Inside its walls was an experiment meant to take place over 50 years that would force a large group of people with radically different ideologies all to live together just to see what would happen. Whereas most other vaults tended to be homogenous with very similar groups of people, 15 flew in the face of all of this. And because of this, quickly after the bombs fell and the vault inhabitants made their way to this facility to get locked away, many tribes and groups started to assemble. This resulted in lots of infighting and turmoil between the people in the vault, and after overcrowding started to become a major issue, a large portion of the vault residents decided to actually leave, taking the Gek with them in the process. This group of vault dwellers is actually the initial founding members of Shady Sands, the same destroyed city we see in the TV show and metropolis from the games, which in turn fostered the eventual founding of the New California Republic, or NCR, one of the most notable government-like entities that has actually succeeded since the bombs fell. Other groups from the vault, on the other hand, formed raider or bandit tribes that would kill and steal for survival. And an even smaller group decided to stay in the vault even after it had been stripped of resources, assuming it would be more safe. Maybe most surprising of all, though, is just how crucial this vault and its initial people have become to the Wasteland, being the initial home and birthplace for so many factions and ideologies that even decades later would define the Wasteland we know in Fallout. And it goes to show that even extremely diverse groups of people assembled together, while cause for initial concern and violence, can cascade into truly great things in the long term because of being forced to see so many sides. While Fallout Tactics is no longer considered canon in the Fallout universe, it still did give us a look into one of the coolest vault ideas out there, and also one that more than likely will eventually be canon based on the name. Vault Zero, constructed into the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, was home to essentially the main operational vault and base where most of the pre-war United States geniuses and leadership could be housed. Inside, people were put into cryogenic stasis pods similar to Vault 111, and their brains were removed from their body, all being hooked up into one massive supercomputer called the Calculator. The machine was supposed to function as a mastermind of sorts that would serve as a computational device to best figure out how to nurture human society into post-war greatness. But due to budget cuts in the Department of Defense during the Vault's construction, several important backup systems were not added to the neural links, and this eventually led the Calculator itself to become corrupted and begin a so-called pacification protocol, where now the supercomputer's main directive was to purge the wasteland of all life and kill all humans without question. In Fallout Tactics, as the player character the Warrior, you and the Brotherhood of Steel must work to stop this fearsome machine at all costs. And while this is now no longer fully canon, the events in Vault Zero definitely make you think about what most of the pre-war leadership in the Enclave or inside certain vaults must be doing. And as we know, there's been tons of lore in this series about what's really going on, ranging from Vault Tech dropping the bombs as implied in Season 1 of the show, to the Enclave or United States government using the vaults as experiments to help them in long-form space travel to colonize other planets in a previously cancelled Interplay version of a Fallout cinema adaptation. But whatever turns out to be true in the lore eventually, it's vaults like Vault Zero which give us a great look into the twisted minds behind all the madness and how they would stop at nothing to achieve pure power and domination while cutting corners to get there. For those of you that don't know what control vaults are in Fallout, they essentially act as a way to validate the otherwise sick and twisted experiments going on in the other vaults. Rather than killing people for sport or running wild experiments, the control vaults are simply a normal place meant to maintain a stable society for potentially hundreds of years, and this results in these vaults serving as a way to validate the outcomes of experimentation elsewhere, just like a control in any scientific experiment. After all, as we know, the main purpose of most of the vaults originally was to run horrific social or scientific tests on unwitting and innocent subjects in order for Vault Tech to gain scientific research and learnings that could aid them in creating a new and prosperous world post the bombs falling hundreds of years later. And maybe one of the best examples of a control vault actually doing its job is Vault 8 from Fallout 2. Set to open around 10 years after the bombs fell, in 2091, the overseer of the vault gave the orders to open the main vault door and release over 200 inhabitants to help rebuild the world. With the aid of their GECK, or Garden of Eden Creation Kit, a massive terraforming device built from cold fusion that allows vault dwellers to more easily harness the post-nuclear wasteland for themselves, they were able to found Vault City as one of the main areas we get to run around in and explore in the second game. It's one of the best examples of a vault experiment and goal not going horribly wrong, and while Vault City is by no means a perfect paradise, by the time we find it in-game in 2241, it's a massive and sprawling city unlike many other places in the wasteland, with cutting-edge technology and medicine to boot. Sadly though, hundreds of years later, it was also home to rampant slavery and a form of a caste system as well, along with concerning radiation leaks everywhere. And it's a stark reminder of why vault dwellers are often considered the most cowardly people in the wasteland, because after coming to the surface, things tend to become more feral and difficult to manage. For many control vaults, simply hiding inside forever, like Vault 84, might actually be the ideal. Nowadays though, Vault 8 is simply used as a storage facility and medical bay for Vault City, a far cry from its heyday before. Vault 13 is one of the most recognizable in the series, and that's because it's actually where you start out your journey in Fallout 1, and by proxy, Fallout 2 as well. And that's because the second game is actually the only mainline entry that doesn't begin in a vault, instead picking up right from where you left off in the first game. The vault itself is nothing more than a standard control facility meant to open up when the Enclave calls for it. But in the first game, when you start, the vault is suffering from a massive water chip failure, and multiple different people inside have been sent out into the wasteland in search of a fix. When you come into the picture though, things have gotten a lot more dire. And now with the facility's water chip having completely failed, the vault only has 150 days left before everyone inside dies. You, as someone called the Vault Dweller, are sent on a mission as the Vault's last hope to go and find a fix, and eventually you find extra water chips in Vault 12 under Necropolis, a massive ghoul city. But when you come back and tell the Overseer of your deeds, he sends you on one more mission to find out the cause of all of the super mutants you've seen in the wasteland, and this leads you down the path to finding someone called the Master. And for those of you that don't know, the Master was actually a main antagonist from the original Fallout games, who is a massive computer-human-monster hybrid that speaks in hundreds of voices of those he has enveloped and wishes to create an army of hyper-intelligent and strong super mutants to take over the world and bring prosperity. He sends his goons into nearby vaults in order to get fresh and non-tainted humans, which he can dose with high amounts of FEV, or the Forced Evolutionary Virus, hoping to make the most capable super mutants possible. FEV in Fallout is actually an artificial virus that was created at one of West Tech's top research divisions before the Great War, and actually works by changing the genotype and phenotype in human beings, quite literally modifying what we can become, and in this case, creating massive hulking super mutant brutes. The reason Vault Dwellers are so good for this is because their DNA has not been tainted by the radioactive wasteland above, meaning it can more easily be manipulated at a cellular level to force mutations without issue. And on top of this, there are actually many strains of the virus as well, which is why super mutants on the East Coast, like in Fallout 3, are so much more intellectually inferior to their brothers on the West Coast, who are subject to more advanced strains of FEV. Nonetheless, you eventually take down this monstrosity known as the Master in his command center, the Cathedral, and return back to your vault to let them know of the good news. Sadly though, when you arrive, the Overseer refuses to let you in, noting that he is now scared that people inside will see your heroics and want to go into the wasteland themselves, so he turns you away, forcing you to go back into the wasteland on your own, and kicking off the start of Fallout 2. Overall, even though Vault 13 is so vital to the Fallout series as a whole, being literally where it all began, in the grand scheme of things, it isn't actually that bad of a place to live at all. Outside of the water shortage crisis, most people inside lived happy and decent lives. This is without a doubt one of the best you could have lived in after the bombs fell. As many of you already know, when the bombs first dropped during the Great War that sent Earth into an Armageddon and fallout, those who had signed up for vaults quickly made their way to shelter to hide from the chaos. But for the residents of Vault 12, they quickly learned that their fate would be much more gruesome than anything outside. This particular vault was running an experiment to see what would happen to humans exposed to great amounts of radiation. And to do this, the doors to the vault were simply forced to stay open, allowing massive amounts of radiation to flow into the quarters, which was outfitted with sensory equipment to monitor the inhabitants. Because the vault was located under Bakersfield in California as well, the citizens of the vault all started to rush to the entrance as the bombs were falling and people were dying. Sadly though, for all of the people that did survive long enough to make their way inside this vault, the massive amounts of radiation started to take their toll. Many families and children started to die as their skin peeled away, and many bands of raiders quickly formed which would kill and steal for survival. Most horrifying of all though, a large segment of the population began to transform into ghouls, with some residents even deciding to leave because of this and set out into the wasteland to find a better home. The remaining ghouls that did stay though founded the city of Necropolis, also known as the City of the Dead, which is a ghoul and plague-filled megastructure built over the ruins of Bakersfield. These ghouls were all led under the banner of Set, a tyrannical monstrosity whose face has become completely unrecognizable due to all of the radiation that has been pumped into his soul, and this resulted in a very well-known and avoided city in the wasteland. Regardless though, even imagining the conditions that the initial inhabitants must have been under in Vault 12 is utterly catastrophic. The screams and agony that must have filled the vault during its initial years is staggering, and the pain and suffering that these people went through due to no fault of their own is so sad to see.